Hey, Bowie Manning here. Welcome to the Garden Report, a Monday edition. We're continuing our series, previewing all the rival teams around the East, NBA teams that the Celtics could see in the playoffs, teams that might be able to threaten the Celtics this year as they try to repeat for a championship. And how can we do that without mentioning the Miami Heat, first round losers to the Celtics, the Jimmy Butler, Terry Rozier down in that series. Um, Not really a fair fight, but one that the Celtics still handled pretty easily there, and more losses for them this offseason. Wes Goldberg joins us, Locked On Heat, Real GM Radio here on CLNS
Let's
Media.
go.
Welcome aboard, Wes. Great talking to you as always. What are you expecting from this team this year? It's always tough to figure out what they're going to do. Jimmy Butler's there, Bam Adebayo's there. That's always going to give them a chance alongside Eric Spoelstra. But more losses, tougher East. Philly takes Caleb Martin from them, and it feels like we're at the brink of whether this Heat run is gonna continue here or whether this is gonna be the year where it all comes apart.
Certainly feels that way, doesn't it? I think we will see a more motivated team in the regular season, right? We can go back to the 2023 finals run, and the narrative kind of coming out of that with Miami making it to the finals out of the play-in tournament was, well, did the Miami Heat figure out something about the regular season? Did they prove that the regular season doesn't matter and it's all about the playoffs? And I always thought that that narrative was a little overstated overall because you talk to people within the Miami Heat organization, and they were just sort of like, "Look, we didn't want to be in the play-in tournament. This wasn't our plan. We're kind of fortunate to have made it as far as we did." And then last year, I don't know, it kind of felt like they were resting on their laurels in a surprising way. And we didn't get the most motivated and engaged Jimmy Butler. Um, I think that was a really big part of it. I also think injuries really, really hurt that team. And it felt, and the way I always described last season, and it felt like it was over before it really even started. Jimmy Butler didn't play in the preseason because of a nagging injury. He missed games early in the season. You had Tyler Hero out for a really long stretch. Kyle Lowry, he just sort of like he had the weird training camp vibes with him. Was he going to be the starting point guard after Gabe Vincent left? Is he not? He said sort of declares to the media, "I'm the starting point guard no matter what anybody says." Basically taking shots at Eric Spoelstra in that way. They trade him by January. They bring in Terry Rozier. Terry Rozier joins a team that's like on their first 7-game losing streak in like a decade or whatever it was. And so he's got a hard time finding his place. And then there's Duncan Robinson leaves the lineup with his back injury. It was just injury after injury after injury. And I think, as disappointing as last year was, it was a borderline miracle that they were even in the playoffs. Like it was sort of a testament to them because no team in the postseason had more games lost to injury than the Miami Heat, and it wasn't even close. They were down there with teams like Memphis and Portland, who were picking in the lottery in terms of games lost to injury. So that's essentially where that season ended up. And I think because of all of that, I was talking with one of the Heat assistant coaches the other day, and he said, "Look, nobody's counting us in the contender tiers. Like they see all the stuff in the media, and they know like nobody's talking about the Miami Heat as a legitimate NBA Finals contender." And I think for good reason, by the way. But that's bulletin board material for them. So I think that this team is going to come out and look to avoid the play-in tournament for what could be the third year in a row, and actually stack some wins in the regular season. That's what I think this team will be more motivated for the jump of the season, more motivated right out of the gate, and hopefully that leads to some better vibes and maybe potentially even continuing the Jimmy Butler era.
Yeah, and he'll decide a lot of it, right? No idea how he's gonna come out of this offseason where he doesn't get an extension and can still get one done, I guess, but it doesn't feel like there's much motivation to do that before next free agency. He's gonna have to come out and prove he's still a guy who can make max money, who can carry a team, so that adds motivation on his part, I guess, but there could also be some frustration, I'm sure, that, stems from that, and a lot of it's gonna be decided early next year, I feel like. They gotta figure out what their rotation is. We'll see what kind of Butler they're getting. We'll see what kind of steps Bam can take. And I was pretty excited about what we saw from him at the Olympics, hitting threes, playing a little bit of four next to Davis. That's maybe something they can do here. And I love who they drafted in the first round, Khalil Ware, one of my favorite guys in this draft class. So I think he's allowed to can make an impact immediately with this team here. But when you take the depth hits that they have, losing Gabe Vincent, losing Max Strus, now losing Caleb Martin, who was an important glue guy there, you're talking about Jovic playing significant minutes now. Jaquez, who I like, who I believe in, but being a primary option on this team. Rozier, we'll see what comes from him. After the neck injury there, and is Hero going to take some steps now after a couple years where it feels like he's stagnated a little bit? I just don't know if there's going to be a ceiling for this team to rise higher than they had been the last handful of regular seasons here. Now, could Butler play more? That would help. Could Bam take a step? He's still in an age range, I guess, where he can continue growing here. And the young guys can certainly play better than we expect them to here. But you're asking a lot of pretty much everybody across the board here to make this team better than where we picture them, maybe in like that 6, 7, 8 range.
Everybody's got to be better. I mean, you hit it. I mean, it starts with Jimmy Butler. He's the head of the snake. When he's engaged, the Heat had an 8-1 record last year in games that Jimmy Butler posted a 30% usage rating or more. Basically, when Jimmy Butler was playing like a star, the Miami Heat were really good. 30% usage rate is high, but it's not like Luka Doncic. It's not James Harden Rockets level usage rate. It's usually that's a rate that usually is associated with a star level player. And when Jimmy Butler plays like a star and doesn't kind of fade it into the background in more of a complementary role, when he's the head of the snake, all the other pieces sort of fall into place for Miami. You're not asking Tyler Hero, like we saw in that Celtics series, to be like the lead playmaker on a team that is trying to win a playoff round, right? Like that's just not who Tyler Hero is ever going to be, and that's okay. He's a really good sort of complementary offensive player, second side attacker, catch and shoot guy, 40% three-point shooter, great movement shooter, all these things. Bam Adebayo, he does everything at an elite level at the center position, except for score the basketball, which he does at a very good level, but not in an elite level. So asking him to be your main scorer as opposed to letting him do all the things that he does at an elite level doesn't really behoove him or the Miami Heat. Jimmy Butler needs to be that guy. But even outside of that, you're absolutely right. Like I work on my I'm starting to work on my top 100 player rankings right now.
All right,
And
I just rolled mine out.
you did? Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
what was besides Jimmy and Bam then? I'll tell you, and maybe you get a moment to pull yours up here. But besides Jimmy and Bam, I didn't have anybody in the top 90 on the Miami Heat roster, and that's a problem. And for the Heat to make like a step, I don't know that anybody that's outside of that range is going to take a leap into being like one of these top 50 or 60 players in the NBA, which is basically like 4 Boston Celtics, right? You have like 4 of those guys in the top 60. So to compete with the Celtics and get through the team to beat, it feels like you're going to need several like of the Terry Rozier is going to have maybe his best season in a long time. Tyler Hero is going to have to take a little bit of a leap here from maybe a top 90-ish guy to like a top 70-ish guy. Jaime Jaquez Jr., Nikola Jovic, it feels like one of those guys has to pop, and in a way that makes them like one of the better 100 players in the NBA. So it's gonna, and then across the board, you're gonna need something from Khalil Ware. You're gonna need all those guys. But if you had a moment to pull your list up here, like where was the next Miami Heat player on your list?
I'd probably go to Jaquez. Like he's the next guy who can rise into that territory, but
Yeah,
no one made the list. And that makes sense, right? Hero's not a top 100 guy right now, especially when you think about where the defense is at, what's made him challenging to play against a team like Boston.
I had him on the
Ver
fringe. I had him at 90. Yeah,
Yeah, with Hero.
I had Hero at 90, and I think I had Rozier a little bit lower than that.
So
But that
my last 10 guys on were Josh Hart, Mark Williams, who I really like going into this year. And my list was projecting a little bit. Obviously, Williams didn't play much last year. Kuzma, Kaminga, who I think is going to take a step into this year. Trey Murphy, Colin Sexton, Herb Jones, Al Horford, I still think is a top 100 guy, and Keegan Murray and Dante DiVincenzo. So, yeah, I have Hero kind of in the same range as those guys. Jaquez, I think, can maybe get there this year with some real steps. And I am excited about what he can do going into this year. But no one's a slam dunk among those other guys in the top 100. Rozier, especially coming off the injury and stuff last year, you can't really say that right now.
totally fair. I have a lot of the same names sort of in my bottom 10 there, and my like kind of bubble on the way out. But yeah, just like it, whether or not they're the 90th best player or the 103rd best player, it's still not going to be good enough, right? They have to get into like that firm area of, hey, these are high level starters and these are firmly top 100 guys, and they just don't have that depth. But that's sort of the interesting part of this too is if if this team can sort of figure out a way to get into the playoffs, then you have Bam, you've got Jimmy, you've got Eric Spoelstra. Who knows? You can't really ever count this team out in terms of being competitive, but hitting that level of like winning a championship, which is still the goal of this team, that just seems really tough for the roster the way it is right now.
Yeah, you're going to need some breaks. You're going to need guys to stay healthy on your team as well. And
Yeah.
then you're gonna need guys to play above their level there, and then it's like, all right, what's the plan here? And that seems to be a question, we'll ask right after this break here. What is it? What is the window at this point? Is it worth extending given Butler's age, or do they need a little bit of reset? This is a conversation we've had before, but I want to shout out PrizePicks. Go to PrizePicks as it doesn't take long. It's Monday. You got Monday Night Football tonight. If you want to throw some guys into your daily fantasy team just for tonight, or you can start looking ahead to next week, and it's going to be the Patriots on Thursday. So if you want to start to look at some names who are going to be involved in that game, it's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Christian McCaffrey already went down for me, but in my daily fantasy sports leagues here on Prize Picks, you get a new team every week. You get a new chance every week. So the injuries don't really matter. And right now they're throwing in Caleb Williams. One passing yard gets you a free square win for all of September. So you're already halfway there to a win with Caleb Williams just needing one yard to get a hit on his. Um, Two or more players, you know the deal, and you can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS. All you gotta do is pick more or less on these player projections, and if you get them correct, you'll win. Get $50 instantly as well when you play $5 with that code CLNS. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks. Get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need a win to receive the $50 bonus. That's guaranteed. So a lot of great promotions going on Prize Picks right now, and more coming all the time. Let's move on to that conversation, Wes. The Butler one there. They don't extend him this offseason. I'm sure there's a sense of wait and see. What's he look like this year? How does the team do? Would you sign him long term? Do you think it's worth extending this run beyond this year, or do you think it's time to maybe take a step back and reload and retool on the fly?
If I was in charge, I would not re-sign him to a max contract unless he shows something completely otherworldly this year. And I talked about Jimmy Butler before not being motivated, not being engaged. The thing I didn't say, and that's kind of being overlooked, I think, even locally, is he just turned 35 over the weekend.
Oh yeah.
You don't typically see players be more available and better than they were as they get older, as they get to 35, 36 years old. And so if you're talking about getting a guy, re-signing a guy at 50, $60 million a year, which is what he's going to be eligible for at this age, I just don't know. We're already talking about some of the roster issues on this team, like the holes on this team. If you lose Jimmy Butler, you don't really have that alpha kind of player anymore, unless Bam kind of takes a leap into being that guy. But if you bring him back, you don't really have a way to fill out the rest of the roster unless all of these guys just kind of take these leaps that we were talking about. So look, certainly all that stuff is a possibility. There's a universe where all of these things happen and the Heat re-sign him and everybody feels good. But I just don't see the Heat or any team really signing Jimmy Butler for 50, $60 million a year over multiple years. So that's sort of where I'm at now too, is because there's also, I think, this assumption that Jimmy Butler's just going to opt out next year no matter what. That's $52.4 million player option. That's a
Right.
lot of money to say no to and go into the open market, maybe not knowing fully what's going to happen. And we saw how the open market played out this summer. Like a lot of players thought there was going to be money out there that wasn't there, right? Even DeMar DeRozan went out there and he got signed for whatever, with $25 million a year with Sacramento. It would take Jimmy Butler, but if he signed the DeMar DeRozan contract, that's 2 years to make up what he just said no to. Why would you do that? You could just opt in, make the money, and then be a free agent and figure it out next year. So I don't think there's any guarantee that Jimmy Butler opts out and maybe makes this decision a little bit easier for Miami. If he has a bad year, like if he has a good year, he could opt out and certainly and try to find a deal somewhere else. But if he has a bad year at 35 years old, if there's more injuries, if there's more wear and tear that starts to build up on this guy, why wouldn't he just opt in for next year and say, no, you know what? I'll just take the $52 million. Thanks. I'm at home in Miami. I like being here in Miami. The Heat, by the way, love having Jimmy Butler. They're not like ready to get rid of this guy. There was report from the Athletic that the Warriors called the Heat about Jimmy Butler, and obviously no deal got done, which leads us to believe that the Heat said no to that phone call, and so they're not in a rush to move on from Jimmy Butler. Is sort of the takeaway there. So they're not at that point yet, but if they get to January or February and this team is several games under 500, and maybe there's more injuries to this roster that they can't stay healthy, and it just looks like the writing is on the wall. And there's a team like the Warriors or the Lakers or whatever team that comes out and says, "Hey, we'll give you a dollar for dollar, 90 cents on the dollar, give you some of the stuff that you need to reload and get you out of the Jimmy Butler business." They'd be crazy not to at least consider it, right?
Yeah, no, you always have to consider everything, I think, if you're in that team's position, and you show some patience. I think that's gonna be important. You try to help these young guys grow and move along here, and I think they're still at their best with him leading the charge, especially with how good of a facilitator he is at this stage. The problem, I think, for him and the team in that scenario is there just is such a narrow amount of suitors for him, and I'm glad you brought up DeRozan because I think he's a pretty good comparison. There was some Clippers interest, he was saying. Hard to get a deal done there. Lakers, same thing. 2
Heat.
expensive guys already there. Hard to make trades in this new CBA environment, signing trades as well. And then Philly makes their move for George because obviously they were a team that was floating around here a little bit too. I know there was some of that Warriors reporting going on here, and I don't know how they would have made that work. I think it's a good fit if they could figure it out. But again, probably less money for him in that situation. Is that worth it for better chances Gold even have at a championship at that point? I think they're gonna be the interesting team. I saw the Nets floating around. I guess he could get his money there. I don't really know what he gets there beyond that. So it is interesting to see maybe like a little bit of leverage wrangling going on in the reporting there right now. But at the end of the day, it's probably gonna be the Heat and him trying to make this work, and they have some flexibility here. I know the Lillard thing didn't work out. They still have all the pieces that they were trying to send out to go get him. Miami's always gonna be a destination. I know Durant, that thing started to go a little sideways last year, and there was some rumbling there about maybe he breaks free. I think Houston probably would be in a better spot to land him than Miami is here, but Miami's always gonna be in play, at least with where players wanna end up, and if Butler's there, there's a stronger chance of them ending up there than if he's not. So they're just gonna have to wait, and that's all there really is to it, and it might end in another year where they're in the play-in tournament, but next summer, you see where you're at, and you have a lot of pieces to work with.
Yeah, and do they have to wait a year? Do they have to wait 2 years, right? Like, that's the part of this too, where if I'm the Heat and I just don't wanna be in the Jimmy Butler business anymore, maybe not anything just because of him, just as like, "Hey, we need more roster flexibility. We just signed Bam Adebayo to an extension. Nobody else on this roster, even if we were to trade them, we're gonna provide, like, a ton of flexibility for us." Like, even if they move, like, the next biggest contract, Tyler Hero, Terry Rozier, you're not getting a ton back for those guys. You might even have to attach something to get rid of those contracts, potentially.
Right.
But if you were to trade Jimmy Butler, even for pennies on the dollar, at least you would open up more of that flexibility and obviously maybe get something of
You'd
value
get
back that can
something
help
back.
you, yeah, help you
Yeah.
kind of kickstart things. I know like Bleacher Report just ran this big like fake trade piece, like 5 different Jimmy Butler trade ideas. And I'm like, and it's all like kind of like a couple of pick swaps, one decent player, younger player, like, you got Michael Porter Jr. coming over from Denver in a 2031 pick swap. It's like I think a Heat fan would like roll over in their grave if they saw that. Like nobody wants to trade one of the great players in franchise history for like a decent young player and a pick swap, 8 years from now or whatever, but that's something, right? At least it's something that you'd be getting rid of and like I said, you would at least be taking control of the Jimmy Butler situation where right now Jimmy Butler has all of the control, right? At least for now, as long as he has that player option and hasn't made the decision, he has the ultimate control of I'm either out of here in a year. And I think the Brooklyn thing makes some sense. Like if he just wants the money, why not? Like he loves New York. He's made it very clear. He can live in New York, open up a big face coffee in Brooklyn somewhere and just start doing that whole thing. But um, I think there'll be options for him over the summer. They can always negotiate a sign and trade too with a team that wants to bring him in, like Sacramento did with DeMar DeRozan. Like there's things that they can do, but right now Jimmy Butler holds a lot of the cards.
Yeah, I don't believe for a second that Ben Simmons let's see how Ben Simmons does this year before that's a real thing, teaming up with him there. I am looking at some of these packages, though. The Denver one's not great, but, 2 fresh from the Spurs, Keldon Johnson, Jeremy Sohan. That's interesting. The Houston one, Cam Whitmore coming
Houston,
over
that's
with a couple firsts.
that's the spot I keep looking at for Jimmy Butler. Like if they can't get Kevin Durant or one of these Phoenix Suns guys, like Jimmy Butler, born and raised in Houston, still appreciates that area. He's the
Right.
kind of guy who just fits like Ime Udoka would love coaching that guy. And you're talking about a team that really
And they
desperately
want
wants
a star. That's pretty
right.
clear.
They want to star. They want to take that next step into like the play-in mix. I don't think they're there yet. I love the Rockets' young core. I think they're going to be them and the Spurs are going to be like NBA's Twitter's favorite thing to be. Like, look out for the Rockets. Look out for the Spurs. They could make for a push for the play-in tournament. That's going to be like the fake hot take that everybody has that's out there going into the season. I'm not quite there yet with those guys, but if they were to get Jimmy Butler, that does make a lot of sense for them in terms of like a short-term move and maybe a consolidation trade. If you can get like somebody like Cam Whitmore, or Jabari Smith Jr., Jalen Green, or whatever these young guys are willing to part with, that could make some sense for Miami.
Yeah, and the Heat have been so good at drafting and developing.
Mhm.
What they haven't had the chance to do through this whole run here is actually pick a top tier prospect, have them be the center of that development, the guy, and build around a young player. And that's difficult. It takes some patience. It takes, that step back there that we've talked about at different points. But they might be as well positioned as any other team to do it, given the coaching, given
Mhm.
what success that they've had with other guys in that spot, given that Bam's locked up. I don't think he's in a huge rush to get out of town if they move on from Butler here, and maybe he can even step into that role a little bit. I have some doubts about that, as I know you mentioned with some of the offensive limitations he has, but maybe Butler's out of the picture and he embraces that a little bit more. So it's all feasible there. I guess the interesting thing will be if this team starts slow, if they're out of that playoff mix early through, like, the quarter way, halfway point of the season here, is this something that could even happen at mid-year, especially with him having a player option that he's not super likely to
Right.
decline if he ends up somewhere that he likes?
Yeah, I mean, their first 20 games, we're gonna know everything we need to know about the Miami Heat by Thanksgiving. We're pretty much gonna know their first 20 games whether this team is good or bad because they have a pretty challenging stretch here to open up the season. And if the season goes sideways by January, I wouldn't say that a Jimmy Butler trade is off the table mid-year. I wouldn't say that at all. Like that's totally a scenario that could play out here. And that might be the best case scenario for Miami. The problem is that I shouldn't say that's not the best case scenario for Miami,
Yeah.
obviously. But like in the world of Jimmy Butler trades, that would be the best way to do it, I think, rather than wait until next summer when teams will be a little bit more wary because of the player option, having to sign him to an extension, not knowing Jimmy Butler, not having had him in your building for a few months. So all those things. But the other part about the Heat too is as much as I say that this team wants to prioritize the regular season a little bit more, I don't think they necessarily care about being the 1 seed. I just think that they don't want to be in the play-in tournament, right? They just want to be a top 6 seed, which doesn't feel like it should be a hard thing for the Miami Heat, but apparently for the last 2 years it's been difficult. But um, that said, even if this team is 8 games under 500 by the trade deadline, like, the Hawks got into the play-in tournament last year at 36 wins in the Eastern Conference. You could still talk yourself into, okay, we're not very good right now, but if we're healthy by the time the playoffs roll around and we're in the play-in mix, we still have a chance. And this Heat team is so stubborn about this. Like that front office, this team firmly, the front office believes that this is a championship contender. They really do. And so getting them out of that, talking them out of that is a really hard thing to do. And for them to do a calculated step back at midseason when they still have Jimmy Butler on this roster, Bam Adebayo, Eric Spoelstra coaching them to say, and basically punting on an opportunity to make the postseason, I just have a hard time seeing the Heat front office making that kind of decision, even if you could argue that it's the right one to make.
Yeah, and the East is so bad. Brooklyn, Washington, Atlanta even, I don't know where they're going. There's a pretty bad underbelly of teams at the bottom of that conference that you can stack up wins against and
Hmm.
stay in that mix. There's not many teams that could catch up to you. I think Charlotte's gonna be interesting this year, obviously, in their
I'm with
division
you.
there, but most of the teams in that division and that conference, you can stack up wins against and stay in that playing mix, especially with 10 teams involved there. I think 5 are gonna be out of that mix by default when you think of Detroit, and, I'm probably forgetting a couple here, but there's easily 5 teams worse than them. So, it will be pretty hard for them to bottom out to a point where you're saying, like, "We're not in it at all right now." But last year, when you look back on it, is an interesting case because Butler was so unavailable. The Celtics were so good. We can look back on that series a little bit and draw from it. But even if he was there, even if Rozier was there, it was going to be an uphill battle for them to knock off Boston in a first round series. But first, I want to shout out uh, game time with basketball coming back soon, but more immediately football going on. Plenty of events to look out for as the fall gets going, and Game Time has all your tickets for them. Whether it is a football game, whether it is a concert that you want to see right now, all of that is happening this week and throughout the month here of September on Game Time. And they still have a great offer here on the app when you download it, $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply when you go to the Game Time app, create an account, and use that code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. You'll get Game Time's picks, curation that makes it easier to save on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. You get all-in pricing that shows you your total up front. Seat views, my favorite part of the app, with a panoramic view of where you're going to be sitting. And the lowest price guarantee, where Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And your ticket is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So again, use that code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase at Game Time. What time is it? It's game time. So as we get into the Heat, Celtics, always an interesting matchup. I wonder what it will be like this year. They don't play each other until December. So
Yeah.
that, first quarter stretch that we're talking about here might be out of the way effectively by the time these teams even meet. But I'm never gonna disrespect them. You saw what Hawkes did in that series. Hero's still a threat here or there. Bam, a versatile defender, and, I know the Celtics, when they look at the East, they're always looking at Miami because of that switching attack, and I think switching's still the one thing that frustrates the Celtics offense every once in a while. And Spoelstra had a really good game plan in that game too that flipped the three-point shooting on Boston in a big way there. And obviously the Heat were just so undermanned from that point on. Robinson was hurt. I think Love was hurt in that series too. So everybody was hurt and they didn't have a chance. They meet again this time around. Given what we saw from Boston last year, given that Boston's running this back, is there any chance the Heat could threaten the Celtics the way they did in the past?
Like in a playoff series? Um, I mean, I don't think so, right? Like based on what we saw last year from both of these teams and the lack of any real improvements, like external additions to the Heat. Like this is the thing is, we've seen now 2 years in a row the Heat in the play-in tournament. They did beat the Celtics in the conference finals 2 years ago, on the way to the 2023 finals. They got crushed to them in a series that, like you said, obviously you can't really take a whole lot from because Miami was so hurt. But like also the Celtics won the Eastern Conference by 14 games.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing I like if I push back on some like Heat fans who I interact with, they say, "Oh, we were so hurt in the first round, we never had a chance." Totally true. Also, I don't know that this team had a chance had been healthy. Like we just didn't really see it. We also didn't see them be healthy all year long, so who knows? But um a lot would have to break Miami's way, I think. Like they would have to show a level of health that they just frankly have not seen and I have not showed over the last 2 seasons. You don't really see teams change in like a material way without making any material changes to the roster, or head coaching change, which obviously nobody wants a head coaching change in Miami. So you look at, okay, you tried and failed to get Damian Lillard. You tried and failed to get Kevin Durant. You tried and failed a little bit to get Donovan Mitchell. You tried and failed even this summer to make a marginal like DeMar DeRozan improvement. Or I know they called about Larry Markkinen. They called about Mikal Bridges. This team has tried to make things happen. They just obviously haven't. And so if it's just really difficult for an NBA team to change in any kind of meaningful way when the roster is basically the same. And so for that reason, like you just see what happened with the Celtics last year. They made real changes and they won the championship to the like that's the kind of thing that you kind of need in the NBA, and the Heat just haven't made those changes. So I would say for now, I expect more of the same than for something different to happen.
What stood out most to you about that Celtics run last year, and do you think they're gonna be able to carry forward some of the things they did this past, season, postseason into this year? Obviously, Porzingis is gonna miss a significant portion of it early on here, but do you think there's a team that's poised to take a step beyond what we saw last year, or could there be a hangover, some impact to Porzingis being out, and maybe some other contender emerges in the East here?
I mean, Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown just taking leaps, respectively. That's the part that stood out to me, and just how well everything fit, like throughout the entire season for a team that added 2 new huge pieces in Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis. It just worked, and I thought Joe Mazzulla, his coaching job in year 2 was leaps and bounds better than what it was in year one. Everything from like the X's and O's and all the stuff that he gets credit for, but also the way he like handles the media and presents himself and all those things. Like all of that stuff I thought created a really interesting vibe around the team. And I think he inspired that roster. He imbued confidence into his main guys, and I thought that was really huge. And so yeah, all that stuff was really impressive. In terms of whether or not, you know, I think that they were unfairly criticized for how easy the path was through the Eastern Conference playoffs, but it was also sort of fairly criticized. Like, it doesn't make the championship count less. They still won the Eastern Conference by 14 games. They still beat a really good team in the Dallas Mavericks, wiped the floor with them for the most part in the finals. Like, the championship counts as much as any other championship, but it's also true that they weren't fully tested in the Eastern Conference, and I think they're going to be tested a lot more in the East this year. But what is that? Like, were they what's is any team going to narrow the gap between the team that won the conference by 14 games last year and had this like historic net rating and all those things? Like, I think the East behind them can be better than what it was. My question is, does it matter? You know what I mean? Like, are they going from like losing whatever it was it 2 games in the Eastern Conference playoffs altogether? Do they go from losing 2 games in the East? Like, they could double their losses in the East and have lost 4 games in the playoffs. You know what I mean? So like, I think the East will be better. I don't know how much it'll matter. I like what Philadelphia did quite a bit. I'm not as high on what the Knicks did in the offseason as most people are, but I think they're going to be really good. I don't think the Pacers are really going anywhere. You can't count out the Miami Heat. The Magic and the Cavs will all get better. None of those teams
The
on paper
Bucks.
right now are on the Bucks are I'm higher on the Bucks than I think most people are. I'm not counting them out. But I don't know that any of those teams on paper are close to what the Boston Celtics are.
Yeah, and they all have more questions than the Celtics do. There honestly aren't a lot of questions with the Celtics coming in, and that Porzingis thing, as big as it is, until we see what it looks like early, they were pretty good without him last year and pretty much won all those playoff games you mentioned without him. So that's something you can hang your hat on too if you're them. I'm glad you bring up Missoula. This came out today. I don't know if you saw it. It was a coaching ranking from I think CBS, and of course Spoelstra leads it here, but they had Missoula at 11 behind Tibbs, Budenholzer, Udoka, Hardy. I don't know how he ends up at 7. I like him, but Dagnall, the coach of the year, Lou Kerr, Carlisle, and Nick Nurse.
Hmm.
What do you think about that?
Missoula's too low. Um, I might put Rick Carlisle second. He might be too low. Um, I'm with I like this is such an NBA Twitter thing. I know this is technically from CBS Sports, but like, congrats to Will Hardy for coaching a team to 30 wins 2 years in a row. Like, what is that all about? That to me is when we kind of get too galaxy brained and live in our little bubble. That's like the difference between expectations between teams. So Will Hardy's too high. He's a really good coach. He's too high. Mike Budenholzer hasn't been in the league, so to put him in the top 10 over the guy that just won the and Tom Thibodeau, who just didn't he win Coach of the Year? Who won Coach of the Year last year? Oh, Dagnall.
Um,
Um,
Dagnall, yeah.
Finch is probably too low also. It's funny how Greg Popovich, when he has no talent on the roster, except it now is like a middle of the pack coach, where he might be the greatest coach of all time, if you ask certain people. But I think Jason Kidd is also too low. But yeah, I'm sorry, Joe Mazzulla is he's too low, and we got to stop giving credit to teams to coaches who haven't won anything.
Yeah. No, Hardy's certainly too high there.
I'd say Udoka's
Ime,
probably too high. He's
yeah,
good.
a little bit. Did bring his team to the finals the last time he coached before last year, but you win a championship. I guess the thinking with Joe would be he has so much talent that many of these coaches will be able to succeed similarly. But I think, like you said, he laid his imprint on that team last year with the amount of threes they took, the way they played defense. I think he coached great in the playoffs, had some good adjustments. So he's top 10. I don't know if he's
Yeah,
top 5 at this point, given
I,
the pedigree of some of the guys up there, but a lot of those guys have weaknesses too.
Jamal Mosley's also really low at 19. That guy I might have in the top 10 pretty firmly. That guy did such a good job with the Magic last year, and that's sort of me going up against my argument of don't argue like teams coaches haven't
Yeah,
won
but they
anything
made the
yet, but
playoffs.
they
They
made the
went 7
playoffs, right?
games,
Like,
yeah.
so I do think that we get with Nick Nurse, who I think is a very good coach. I'm not trying to like disparage Nick Nurse, and then I even see a guy like Quinn Snyder at 16 over Taylor Jenkins, Jason Kidd, Jamal Mosley. Like, I don't know. Quinn Snyder's a good coach, but like, so at risk of alienating your entire audience, which is, I guess, your problem, not mine. But um, I we get into like the Brad Stevens level of evaluation here with head coaches sometimes, where you like design a really cool sideline out of bounds play, and all of a sudden you're a top 5 coach, as if that's like 80% of a coach's job. When in reality, like designing a slob is like 2% of a coach's job, right? It's like it's such a little part of the head coach's job, but we give it such importance, and they design like 2 awesome sidelines out of bounds plays, and we're like, "Oh my god, what a schematic person. Like this is so cool. What a great." And it's like, "All right, yeah, it's cool, but like do we have to elevate that person to like the best coach in the league?" And Nick Nurse is still sort of riding the coattails, I think, of the box and one in the 2019 playoffs a little bit, being number
Their
2 here.
defense actually got a little worse than it was the year before too under Doc, I wanna say, when I was looking at it a couple days ago, so and, Embiid was hurt and all that, I thought they did some good things. They managed the Harden thing and still had a pretty good
Yeah,
season, but 2's 2's a little high, and Carlisle, I mean, much success as he's had, they missed the playoffs all those years in Dallas, and their defense was a disaster this year there in Indiana, so I don't know. It's
that's
all
true.
a toss-up. I mean, this list could change significantly just based on how this season goes. How about Malone too? I mean, he's great. Just won the championship. He would have been firmly top 10 coming off the championship a year ago, right?
That's a great point. Yeah, it also just goes to show, like, recency bias is such a huge part. Like, is this a list of the top 10 coaches in the league right now? Or is this a list of, like, performance in, like, last season? Because it almost feels like it's that, but, um, I
I
don't
think it's
know.
looking ahead like my list
It
was,
might be
like who's
looking
the coach
yeah.
for this year.
So, I don't
So
know.
I guess that makes some of them make a little more sense. But again, I felt like the Jazz took a little bit of a step back this year. Maybe through no fault of Hardy's, but you don't get credit for that either. Missoula's top 10. Maybe put him like 7th where Hardy is. I
I
think
would
that'd
drop
be
yeah, I
fair.
would if even if you just dropped Hardy out, moved everybody up, and then Missoula into 10, I would have, like, now he's top 10, like,
Yeah.
that works.
Thibodeau is
Budenholzer
great.
probably doesn't need to be that high. I like Budenholzer a
No,
lot,
I'm
but
interested to see how they do this year, though. I think he
yeah.
was a good fit for that team. And Ime I like again, but they were fine last year. Some offensive weaknesses there. I don't know. Interesting. No, I love
Doc
that we
Rivers
have
is
lists
getting
coming out.
a little disrespected there too. I mean, we act like this guy's a total bum. Like, the guy wins regular season games like a machine. Like, that guy is a regular season's wins machine. Like, we'll give him some credit for that. If we're gonna put Budenholzer at 9, you know,
Their defense did get better under him too in Milwaukee, but and
thought he
then
did a good
everyone
job with
got
him.
hurt.
Yeah,
So I'm interested to see how that goes. I'm high on the Bucks too. I like them. Maybe some reasons for concern there with Middleton and all of that, and they aren't getting any younger. But I'll always believe in Giannis.
that's the
Um,
thing. It's like, if you're gonna beat the Celtics, you gotta a have the best player on the court, because you're not gonna have the better team. You have to have the best, like, 1 through 8, but you have to have the best player on the court. Giannis can be that guy. Joel Embiid could be that guy when he's healthy. That's my problem with the Knicks, is I don't think they have, like, Jalen Brunson maybe could be the best player on the court for a couple of games in a series. Jason Tatum's a better basketball player than Jalen Brunson. Um, but it just feels like the Knicks are trying to beat the Celtics at their own game with a worse roster than the Celtics. And I don't know that
right.
that's how you beat the Celtics. I kind of feel like you just have to pound the living snot out of the Celtics with just a guy like Giannis or Embiid, just like this super physical presence who just like breaks all of your schemes. To me, is like the only way to do it.
Yeah, especially with the way they could be vulnerable at that center position a little bit this year, given Horford's age, Porzingis' injuries. I think that's going to be where you have to try to expose them. But Tatum's made up for that with some of the rebounding and defensive things he's able to do.
Hmm.
I want to talk a little bit more Celtics before we get out of here, but first, let's give a shout out to one of my favorite sponsors, HelloFresh. Love HelloFresh. It's meals right to your door, ready to cook with laid out instructions, prepackaged ingredients. So you don't need to spend any time in the grocery store and you don't have to be figuring out what you need, what you forgot. It's all there and it's America's #1 meal kit. Customizable, love that about it. You can get what you like to eat, what you need to eat, dietary restrictions and all that. You can decide when it comes. It just makes your life that much easier when it comes to preparing food and it makes it fun too, which I love. I'm a big cooking guy. But if you're not, they make it easy for you as well. 50 recipes to choose from every week. Just pick your meals and delivery date. It's that simple. And home cooked meals are so much better for you. You don't always have time to pull it off, but with HelloFresh handling all the meal planning, shopping, and most of the prep makes it easier than ever to get dinner on the table quick and painless. No more endless recipe searching or spending money on the whole jar of spices just for a pinch. With HelloFresh, everything you need to make delicious meals comes right to your door, pre-portioned and fresh, plus the included step-by-step recipe cards that I mentioned. So for free breakfast for life, as long as you use HelloFresh, go to HelloFresh.com and use the code FreeGarden. HelloFresh.com/FreeGarden gets you one breakfast item per box while your subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life just by going to HelloFresh.com/FreeGarden. America's number one meal kit, HelloFresh. So, before we wrap this up, Wes, if you had any question for the Celtics this year, what would it be coming in this year?
The Kristaps Porzingis injury. I mean, I I don't believe anything I read on it, and not because I think anybody is full of it or whatever, but I just this was a rare leg injury. This is the way it keeps being told. Like it was a rare injury, a weird leg injury, all these things. I'm like, okay. So then if it's rare and if it's weird, then I'm not gonna. I have no idea how it's gonna play out. So I know that he's gonna be out for a couple months. We probably won't see him until like the end of this year, early January or something like that, based on some of the timeline that's been out there. But I don't know that he's gonna be back and healthy next year, like for the rest of the season. Are we just assuming that once he's back, he's back? I wouldn't assume that. I mean, we saw the guy twist an ankle in the first round and he was out for almost the entire playoff run. So that to me is the big question with Al Horford, 38 years old now. I have that right? Like he's going to have to, I mean, he was already on a little bit of a maintenance program last year. That's only going to continue. So there's just going to be a lot of nights where it's Xavier Tillman and who's a fine player. And they have some depth there at that position too. But the difference between, I think the biggest thing with me is the Celtics are a great team even without Kristaps Porzingis and maybe even without Al Horford. Like without both of those guys, they could still be a great team. They're so
I think they
deep and
went
so
4-0
talented on the
without them
perimeter.
last year, both of
E-
them.
Exactly, but they're not an unstoppable team. They're not the team that just flip every matchup on its head the way that Kristaps Porzingis helped them do in the finals and all these things. In game one, the first half of game one, where it was just unreal. But like they go from unstoppable potentially to great, which great is still good enough to win the championship, but it does open the window, I guess, for somebody to upset them. And that would be my really that's like the only concern I have about that team is can they get enough quality minutes at that center spot to kind of stiff arm the East, the competition in the East that's coming for them.
Yeah, and my worry there, and I have some of the same concerns as you. I've heard that it's not an injury that's gonna threaten him beyond the recovery time there, and that recovery time could linger longer. And I think Brad Stevens has emphasized that that could be the case. I think 5 to 6 months brings him to like the end of December, but on the game would be surprised if he's still out into the new year. You can't lean on Horford more to overcome that, because that's just gonna put that much more stress on Horford, who stayed healthy through this whole second Celtic stretch. It's just fatigue and the management and stuff like that that you talked about there. So, yes, playoff time, and when people talk about that 31-6 record, a lot of it came in the playoffs, and the beauty of the playoffs is that Horford's gonna be playing 35, 40 minutes anyway, so you can
Hmm.
make up for it that way. During the regular season, he's probably 25, 26, so that leaves a lot more minutes for the depth guys, and they're capable, but like you said, it lowers the margin for error in those spots, and you probably have to play a different style, probably have to come up with some new game plans. It definitely changes the way they look out there when it's Horford instead of Porzingis. Like,
Would they go
Horford's great.
small? Would they go small with like Tatum and Jalen Brown sort of as the front court there? Because they didn't experiment with that as much as I think people thought they would last year.
I think you're gonna need one of the bench guys to step up if that's the case. Like, Hauser out there with that lineup, I don't know, as much Pritchard, certainly your 3 guards at that point. Can Springer get involved? He's a little sturdier defensively, but he's just not an offensive player at this point, and they drafted a wing in Shireman,
Yeah,
who maybe you could go small with out there, but you don't
I
know
like
what
him a
he's
lot.
capable of yet. So they're gonna have to try some stuff, and that's Steven said they're excited about that. Like, they
Hmm.
can experiment a little bit early on. Maybe this isn't as dominant of a regular season team, and that might not be a reason to panic if they're experimenting. But the worst case scenario would be Horford 35 minutes every
Hmm.
night just to get by and win every game. And that's I think Missoula will adapt to that, but Missoula wants to win every game. Every coach does. So I think that's gonna be tough for him. Like, I don't know if he's gonna play Springer. I don't know if he's gonna
Right.
play Sharman a ton if he doesn't look great right away. And Horford's super reliable. So that's gonna be an adjustment for him too early on. The first quarter of the season is gonna be interesting because I don't know if it's gonna be like the '09 Celtics where they go crazy. That team started 27-3 after the title, or there's going to be some hangover slash Porzingis issues early on. I'm super interested to see.
Yeah, it's a great point you brought up because even the experimenting that Joe Mazzulla did last year, it was typically like weird defensive lineups and zones and just like offensive like 5 out
He
stuff,
loves
but
double
always
big.
it was always with his most talented players on the court, right? In
Yeah.
terms of like experimenting with, is this player any good? We didn't get a lot of that,
No, they
and
didn't play O'Shea a ton. I think that's a
yeah,
reason he's probably gone. So that led to, a lot of success last year, but you didn't get answers on some of the questions or some of the players on the bottom side of the roster. Even Xavier Tillman had a tough time breaking through early on, and they're going to need him.
yeah. Yeah, no, and I think that's sort of the luxury of, well, we just won the championship. So the proof of concept that we could do this, we know that. We know we could do it. We don't need to be this dominant team in the regular season the way that they might have needed to be. I think being as dominant as they were in the regular season obviously gave them all the confidence and helped them win the championship. Like in terms of the regular season mattering or not, I thought the regular season mattered a lot for Boston last year. Like a lot, a lot. Um, they don't need that to matter as much. I don't think the Celtics have the number one record in the East this year. I think there's other teams that are probably a little bit more hungry who want to stack up wins. Where the Celtics, I think they could afford not to like necessarily win games, but be productive, like just be productive in other ways, right? Like they're still gonna roll out of bed and win 55 games. Like that's just gonna happen. But um, do they need to win 60 plus? I don't know that they do. I think they need to be more productive in other ways and sort of find answers on other spots of the roster.
That'll be one of my first questions at training camp, which begins in a week. We will have coverage of it. Media day a week from tomorrow. So we are on the doorstep of Celtic season. It's a big reason I wanted to get into some of these other teams who are probably getting going a week later. I think Heat are around the first, right?
September 30th, media day. The next day, October 1st, they head to the Bahamas for training camp.
All right, are you going?
I uh I have recently decided that I am not going to go. If I'm going to go to the Bahamas, I'm not working, man. I'm not doing that. I'm going to go to the Bahamas.
And you live in Miami, right? There's not
Yeah, what's
a
the
big
difference?
reasoning. He's Wes Goldberg, great friend of the show, and a member of the network now as well through
Let's
RealGM
go.
Radio. What do you got going on over there?
So, did a really fun. We're only a couple episodes in, but I did a fun one with Dan Devine from Yahoo Sports last week, trying to predict the top 10 offenses in the league for this upcoming season. Um, Not to give it away, but I had the Celtics pretty high up on that list. So if you guys want to check that one out, and then this week I'll be joined by Mo Dakhil to predict the top 10 defenses for next season.
All right, I have to imagine the Celtics going to be in both of those.
Probably, I would imagine. Yeah.
All right, thanks so much for being here. We'll talk to you probably later in the year once the Celtics and Heat are on the verge of matching up again. And again, go check that out. I think you guys have your own YouTube channel, right? Over at
Yes,
RealGM,
please
so go
subscribe. We have
subscribe
like
over
20
there.
something subscribers now. So we need flood the subscription. Hit that subscribe button. Real Gym Radio, its own YouTube channel. Go subscribe over
All
there,
right.
please.
And I'll put that link down there below. Of course, check out our sponsors, HelloFresh, HelloFresh.com/free garden, PrizePicks, great time of week to get in on that promo code CLNS, as well as GameTime, same code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase over there. Again, terms apply. That's it for this week. We'll have the full crew on to preview training camp, I'm sure, at some point this week, and we'll continue to have some team previews here as well. So subscribe, Celtics All Access, CLNS Media for all those alerts and more. Thanks again to Wes, and we will talk to you later this week.